Right now, I'd like to welcome in Brett Tolman. He is the Executive Director of Right on Crime, one of my favorite guests of all time, and one of the people I wanted to have here on the show first and foremost. Brett, great to be with you here, and welcome to everybody watching at home on N2. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, John. Great to be with you again.
There's so much rhetoric, heated rhetoric right now here in this country, college campuses, which historically have been a bastion for free speech, but this obviously does not fall under the category of free speech. Talk to us about the things that you see people saying on campus and your concerns about where this rhetoric may be going.
Yeah, John, it is, it's a time that we really haven't seen in our history, at least. There have been high emotional historical times where, we were pitted Americans against Americans on political division. Issues facing the rest of the world, World War I, World War II. The distinction here is, for the first time that I can recall, we have American politicians who are fueling the fire of hate rather than assisting and helping to quench that fire. And we have individuals that are now picking this up. We have a lot of mental health issues in this country, far more than we've ever experienced. So it does not surprise me that we're seeing this kind of rhetoric and divisiveness throughout our college campuses, where we know they're the first lines of bad ideas are being fabricated in this country. And it's tough as a prosecutor. You do not, there's hate crimes that we have to be concerned about, and you have to protect, those that fall within that statute. But you are free in this country to believe that one side or another is right or wrong. But once you cross that line into threatening those individuals with their lives, we do have to step in and try to root that out.
Yeah, and some of the stuff we've heard pales in what we heard on January 6th, I should say, pales in comparison to some of the stuff we've heard from these students. And the question is, you kind of expect it from the students, but as you indicated, some of the leaders we see in Washington, D.C. also amplifying this rhetoric. Some of the media seem to be complicit with pushing Hamas talking points. It's all very concerning. But again, as we look at the First Amendment, Brett, I think one of the things that's hard for people, the First Amendment, defenses using the First Amendment, they've been so warped recently. It's hard for, I think, Americans to really understand what the idea is. I'm thinking of the famous quote from Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court Justice. This was dealing with obscenities and explicit pornography. It's just like one of these things. You'd like to think the American public knows it when they see it. When they see, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, broadcast in a, big projection up on the side of a building at George Washington University, most people should understand that is a form of hate speech. It's a Hamas talking point and should not be tolerated. And it's hard to find that common ground in this country nowadays. I also want to talk about the First Amendment in this context, completely separate story, but it does have Disney invoking the First Amendment in Florida, and this is according to the Associated Press. If Florida Governor Ron DeSantis wins a federal lawsuit in which Disney claims its free speech rights were violated by the governor, the company wouldn't be the last entity to be punished over supporting a, quote, disfavored viewpoint. That's what Disney's lawyers say their defense of the LGBT community is. Disney's suit claims that DeSantis unconstitutionally took over their governing district in retaliation for Disney publicly opposing a law banning classroom lessons on sexual orientation, gender identity in these early grades. If a governor takes action because a company speaks out against one of his policies, is there a First Amendment protection here in this case?
Yeah, John, this strikes me more as Disney attempting to, cloak themselves in the First Amendment and to utilize, the LGBT community, which they know if they can feed them some fuel to continue their fire, then they can try to push back on what is, if you boil it down, it is the difference between a state that has been giving favored status to a company, favored tax status, favored decision-making status, it had been in essence granting it the authority to govern itself outside of in any other company what they're allowed to do. I find this to be an unseemly attempt to utilize the First Amendment and the LGBT community to try to push back on what are, the prerogative of voters and a governor that deems somebody has abused the favored position that they've given it.
Right, and I think overwhelmingly, what the polls would show is that parents in Florida do not want their elementary school-age children being taught about drag queens and all this other stuff. And so can a company use the First Amendment, a massive corporation like Disney, use the First Amendment to thwart the will of the voters and the public in a state like Florida? We'll see how this court case goes, but it's a fascinating discussion. And someone only like Brett Tolman could really provide the right type of insight on a noble mind like that. Now, Brett, one more topic I wanted to talk to you about while we have you here, because I think it gives us an opportunity to really highlight the work you do, the amazing work you guys do at Right on Crime. We talked about this story yesterday. A judge in Michigan wants to know why two men convicted as in secondary roles in this strange plot to try and kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, why these two suspects were sent out of state to a federal prison. Everyone has a right to appeal their state convictions. Their two guys' names are Paul Beller and Joe Morrison. They were convicted in 2022. Their lawyers say it's incredibly hard to work on these appeals while they're in federal prisons hundreds of miles away from where they live. The judge is confused about this as well, the state judge. Does this make any sense to you other than what we've seen from our federal judicial system, where they seem to really throw the book at anyone involved in anything that resembles January 6th?
Yeah, John, thanks. I think this is an important and often people overlook these issues. But, one of the reasons why Right on Crime exists is to try to call out the hypocrisy in application of the criminal law. And that can be at the judicial level, it could be at the prosecution level or the investigative level. Here, we have an instance in which we don't have the full facts. We know that there were efforts by the FBI to actually instigate some of this behavior. And now we see that they're being removed and accessed by defense counsels are difficult to understand why this would happen. If the judge is confused, imagine what the American people are. And I'll just add this, John. Think about just this one aspect. Where are all of the advocates who have been crying foul about the criminal justice system when it comes to January 6 individuals or comes to any conservatives that are being targeted? They're silent, they're quiet, they don't seem to recognize that they have to be consistent, that the criminal justice system should be applied consistently regardless of politics. So, thank God you're bringing this up and others that are highlighting it. Otherwise, these stories would die in secrecy.
Well, the criminal justice movement, so to speak, I think has been bastardized by a lot of people for their own means. But what you guys do is so important. It's been exposed in your work on the January 6th defendants and everything else you guys do. And it's why everyone should follow Brett Tolman Brett on X, and stay aware of what Right on Crime is doing. Brett is going to stick around. He's our featured guest this hour. Brett, hang in there. We got